A Hells Angel biker is arrested at a lonely gas station. Then the next morning, that same biker sits behind the bench as the judge, presiding over the hearing into his own arrest. He's a respected federal judge by day and a veteran rider by night, a man who spent decades handing down justice until the system he trusted handcuffs him. What nobody expects, a weary desk sergeant quietly copied files, 2 young officers were driven by quotas, and a hidden drive might expose a department's corruption. In 48 hours, his dignity, his robe, and the town's reputation all collide in one packed courtroom. Can one humiliated judge turn his arrest into the reckoning Millfield Creek desperately needs, or will speaking the truth destroy him first? The photograph had become part of the ritual. Marcus Brennan stood before it every Friday evening, the same way he had for nearly a decade now. Jeremy looked back at him from the silver frame, impossibly young at 23, his marine dress blues crisp and perfect, his smile confident, in that way only young men who don't know they're mortal can smile. "Hey, son," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely disturbing the stillness of the spacious study. The house felt too big on Fridays. His wife Linda had taken the train to visit their daughter in Philadelphia for the weekend. The silence pressed against him like something physical, filling all the empty corners of their suburban colonial with its weight. Marcus set down his leather briefcase, the one with the embossed seal that read, "Honorable Marcus J. Brennan, United States Circuit Court," and loosened his silk tie. The day's cases still tumbled through his mind. A complicated securities fraud matter, a habeas corpus petition, an emergency motion in a civil rights case. Always more papers, always more judgment to dispense. But Friday evenings belonged to someone else entirely. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and draped it over the chair. The crisp white shirt came next, then the perfectly pressed slacks. In their place, he pulled on clothes that felt like a second skin. Worn jeans, heavy leather boots with scuffed steel toes, a black t-shirt that had seen 100 miles of highway wind. The leather vest came last. He lifted it from his raised eyebrows in courthouse hallways at first, until people learned to mind their own business. "I'm heading to Millfield Creek tonight," he told Jeremy's photograph. "Big hearing Monday. Civil rights case. Police department's got some real problems. Discrimination patterns, excessive force complaints. You know how it goes." Jeremy's smile didn't change. It never did. "Thought I'd take the long way, clear my head before I put on the robes again." Marcus picked up his helmet and gloves, then paused at the door of his study. His gaze swept across the law books, the framed diplomas, the judicial commendations that marked 30 years on the bench. All of it felt like costume jewelry compared to the weight of the vest on his shoulders. Outside, his vintage Harley-Davidson waited in the garage like a patient friend. He'd rebuilt the 1984 shovelhead himself, spending countless weekend hours with grease under his fingernails and pain in his heart, channeling grief into chrome and steel. The bike was a beast, loud, temperamental, honest in the way machines can be honest. The engine roared to life with a sound that shook the garage walls. Marcus felt it in his chest, that deep rumble that drowned out the voice of Judge Brennan and let Storm breathe free. He rolled out into the golden light of late afternoon, pointing the Harley toward Route 40 and the open road beyond. The Legacy Riders wasn't like those clubs you saw on television. No criminal enterprise, no turf wars. Just veterans, men and women who'd served their country and found themselves adrift in civilian life, looking for the brotherhood they'd lost when they'd taken off the uniform. They raised money for wounded warrior programs. They escorted funeral processions for fallen soldiers. They visited VA hospitals and homeless shelters. They'd saved Marcus's life, though he'd never quite found the words to tell them that. After Jeremy died, the darkness had been absolute. Linda had her church, her book club, her garden. But Marcus had only his grief, and a courtroom that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The gavel in his hand might as well have been a gravestone. Then Big Mike, a former Army sergeant built like a mountain, had shown up at the courthouse one day with an invitation to a charity ride. Mark motorcycles and never lived long enough to ride one himself. Millfield Creek appeared on a sun-faded highway sign 2 hours later. Population, 8,000. Marcus downshifted and rolled into town as the sun kissed the horizon. Main Street looked like a postcard from 1955. Brick storefronts, a diner with a neon sign, a hardware store with wooden barrels out front. Pickup trucks outnumbered sedans 3-1. His hotel was a budget chain on the edge of town, chosen specifically because it was anonymous and far from anywhere a judge might be recognized. He'd check in later. First, he needed gas. The station sat at a lonely crossroads where the highway met a county road. 2 pumps, flickering lights, windows that hadn't been cleaned since the last presidential election. A bell chimed as Marcus rolled up to the pump and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. He swung off the bike and stretched, his back protesting after the long ride. Through the grimy window, he could see a clerk behind the counter, watching a small television. Marcus unscrewed his gas cap and started filling the tank. That's when he noticed the police cruiser. It pulled into the lot slowly, almost lazily, like a shark circling. Marcus didn't look up, didn't acknowledge it. He'd done nothing wrong, just a man getting gas. But he felt their eyes on him, judging the leather, judging the patches, judging the weathered bike, and the tattoos and the stubble on his jaw. 2 officers emerged from the cruiser, young guys, both of them, probably late 20s. One was tall and lean with nervous energy. The other was stocky, with a crew cut and hard eyes. Their hands rested on their duty belts in that casual but not casual way cops have. "Evening," the tall one said. His name tag read Garrett. "Evening, officers," Marcus replied evenly. He kept pumping gas. "That's a nice bike," the stocky one said. Morrison, according to his tag. "Thanks, she's been good to me." "Where are you headed?" Marcus met Morrison's eyes. "Just passing through." "Passing through to where?" "Does it matter?" The question hung in the air. Doing wrong. "You match the description of someone involved in suspicious activity in the area," Morrison said. It was a lie. Marcus could see it in the way Garrett looked at his partner, surprised. "What description would that be?" "Just show us your ID." Marcus reached slowly toward the inside pocket of his leather vest. Both officers tensed, hands moving to their weapons. "Easy," Marcus said quietly. "Just getting my wallet." His fingers touched the leather billfold. Inside were 2 IDs, his driver's license and his federal judicial identification card. He could end this in 5 seconds. Flash the card, watch their faces drain of color, walk away. But something stopped him. He thought of the hearing Monday morning, all those statistics and reports about discriminatory policing, excessive force, bias-based arrests. He'd read them from the comfortable distance of his bench, through the lens of legal precedent and constitutional theory. What did he really know about how this system worked from the other side? "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them," Garrett said, his voice rising. "I'm just getting my wallet like you asked," Marcus said. "Drop the wallet and put your hands on the bike. Now." The situation was spiraling. Marcus could feel it. That momentum that turns a conversation into a confrontation into violence. He'd seen it happen in courtrooms 1,000 times, watching body camera footage in excessive force cases. Now, he was living it. "Officers, there's no need for this to escalate." "I said hands on the bike." Marcus complied, setting his wallet on the seat and placing his palms flat on the Harley's fuel tank. His heart hammered against his ribs. Morrison moved behind him, kicking his feet apart. "I smell marijuana," Morrison announced. Another lie. Marcus didn't use drugs, never had. "You don't smell marijuana because there isn't any. Are you resisting?" "No, He's resisting," Morrison shouted to Garrett. Strong hands grabbed Marcus's arms, wrenching them behind his back. The plastic cuffs bit into his skin as Morrison cinched them tight. Garrett barked something about resisting as they hauled him toward the cruiser, and Marcus felt the familiar, humiliating ritual of accusation and assumption close in around him. Visible on his forearm, Jeremy's Marine Corps emblem, inked there 3 years after the funeral when the grief finally found a permanent home. Storm closed his eyes and saw his son's smile, heard Jeremy's voice from that last phone call before the deployment. "Don't worry, Pops, I'll be home before you know it." But he never came home, not the way he was supposed to. The squeak of a desk chair pulled Storm back to the present. Through the bars, he watched the desk sergeant stand and stretch his back. The man was somewhere in his 60s, with the thick build of someone who'd spent decades on the job. His nameplate read Kowalski. Unlike the 2 young officers who'd arrested Storm, this one moved with the deliberate calm of experience. Kowalski glanced toward the holding cell. Their eyes met. Storm saw something there. Not contempt, not indifference. Something closer to doubt. The sergeant's gaze lingered for a moment too long. Then he turned away, shaking his head slightly as he returned to his paperwork. The night crawled forward. Storm heard other officers come and go, heard their laughter from the break room, the crackle of their radios, the mundane conversations about shift changes and weekend plans. Life went on around him as if he were already forgotten. Around 3 a.m, Kowalski walked past the cell again. This time, he stopped. "You need anything?" His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "Water? Bathroom? I'm fine." Kowalski studied him through the bars. "You got people you need to call? Lawyer? I'll wait for morning." The sergeant nodded slowly. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Those 2 who brought you in, Garrett and Morrison, they're good kids, mostly, but they're wound tight these days. Department's been under a lot of pressure." Storm said nothing. "I've been doing this job 38 years, Kowalski continued, almost as if talking to himself. "Seen a lot of arrests, good ones, bad ones, ones that made sense and ones that didn't." He paused. "This one doesn't sit right. Then why didn't you say something?" Kowalski's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I've got 2 years until retirement. Because Chief Briggs doesn't take kindly to questions. Because We're cooperative." He straightened his shoulders. "Maybe it won't matter. Maybe nobody'll ever read it. But it'll be there. On the record. Why are you telling me this? Because somebody needs to know that not everyone here is okay with what happened tonight." Kowalski's voice cracked slightly. "And because if things go sideways, you'll need evidence that this was wrong from the start." Before Storm could respond, the sergeant turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The hours that followed felt like years. Storm dozed fitfully, his mind cycling through everything that had led to this moment. He thought about Monday's hearing, about the civil rights lawsuit against this very department. He thought about the complainants he'd read about in the case file, people of color who'd been profiled, humiliated, arrested on pretenses as flimsy as his own. Now he understood in his bones what those words on paper really meant. Dawn came slowly, filtering through the high window of the cell in shades of gray and gold. Storm heard the shift change, the arrival of new voices, the bureaucratic shuffle of paperwork and coffee. Finally, a young woman appeared at the cell door. She was dressed in a neat but inexpensive suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and her eyes were sharp with intelligence. "Mr. Brennan?" She checked a notepad. "Or do you prefer Storm?" "Marcus is fine." She unlocked the cell. "I'm Rebecca Chen, Public Defender's Office. I've reviewed your arrest report, and quite frankly, it's a joke. There's no probable cause, no evidence, and the officers' statements contradict each other in at least 3 places." Storm stood, his joints stiff from the hard bench. "What happens now?" "Now we get you out of here." Rebecca's voice was crisp, efficient. "I've already spoken to the magistrate. You're being released on your own recognizance. The charges will likely be dismissed at your arraignment, assuming the prosecutor has half a brain." She walked him through the release process, signing forms, retrieving his confiscated belongings, collecting the plastic bag that held his wallet and keys. His leather jacket was returned with a stain on the sleeve that hadn't been there before. Outside, the morning sun felt like a judicial robes hung in the closet, precisely where he'd left them, waiting for Monday. Storm set down his keys and walked to the bathroom mirror. The face that looked back at him was the same as always, weathered, bearded, tired. But the eyes were different. They'd seen something they couldn't unsee. He showered for a long time, washing away the smell of the holding cell. Then he dressed in clean clothes and sat on the edge of the bed with Rebecca Chen's business card in one hand and his phone in the other. The anger was still there, burning in his chest, but it had transformed into something else, something colder and more focused. For a decade, he'd presided over cases from the elevated distance of the bench. He'd read testimony, reviewed evidence, made rulings based on legal standards and precedent. He'd believed in the system he served. Now he knew what it felt like to be on the other side of that system, to be powerless, to be judged not by the content of his character, but by the assumptions strangers made about his appearance. Storm looked at his robes again. On Monday, he would put them on and walk into that courtroom. Officers Garrett and Morrison would be there. Chief Briggs would be there. The whole apparatus of Millfield Creek's justice system would be assembled before him. They had no idea what was coming. Storm picked up his phone and called Linda. When she answered, her voice was warm with relief. "Marcus, I was getting worried. How's the trip?" "It's been educational." He kept his voice steady. "I'll tell you about it when I get home. How's Catherine?" They talked for a few minutes about their daughter, about Linda's weekend in Philadelphia, about ordinary things that felt extraordinarily precious after the night he'd just endured. When he hung up, Storm stood and walked to the window. Millfield Creek spread out before him, a small town with tree-lined streets and a main square, the kind of place that looked peaceful on the surface. But he'd learned that surfaces could lie. Monday was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would change everything. Storm touched the business card in his pocket. Then he reached for his judicial robes, running his fingers over the black fabric that represented 30 years of service to the law. "Is enough to warrant an independent criminal inquiry." Marcus folded the papers, the weight inside him shifting from personal violation to a broader duty. He looked at Kowalski, at Rebecca, at Sarah in the doorway, at the people who had stepped forward when the system had tried to conceal the rot. "Thank you," he said simply. "All of it will be turned over to Judge Rodriguez and the Chief Judge, and Sergeant Kowalski will make arrangements for your safety." Outside the conference room, the courthouse hummed with the day's proceedings, but in that small room the air had cleared some. Marcus felt, for the first time since Friday, a clean line between what had been done to him and what he could do in response. He gathered his things and stood. There was work to be done, motions to file, affidavits to prepare, a special master's investigation to set in motion. More than that, there was a case to try in public, a police department to scrutinize, and a community that had come forward ready to watch. As he stepped back into the corridor, Marcus breathed in and let the steadiness return to him. The robe on the back of his door would still be there that evening, but he would not be the same man who had put it on that morning. Whatever came next, he would meet it openly, under the light. The morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. Marcus stood at the bench, his hands resting flat against the surface, feeling the weight of every eye in the room upon him. He'd barely slept. The night had been spent drafting and redrafting the words he was about to speak, words that would either restore integrity to this proceeding or destroy what remained of his career. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Media representatives lined the back wall, cameras banned but notebooks ready. Community members filled every seat, and there, in the front rows, sat officers Tyler Garrett and Chris Morrison, flanked by their department's attorneys. Chief Walter Briggs sat behind them, his face an unreadable mask. "Before we proceed," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, "I must make a disclosure to this court." The room fell into absolute silence. "This past Friday evening, I was arrested by officers Garrett and Morrison, appointing Special Master William Chen, no relation to counsel, to conduct a parallel investigation into both the civil rights allegations against this department and the circumstances surrounding my arrest." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This hearing will continue. I will not recuse myself, but every finding, every ruling, every decision I make will be subject to independent review. This court will operate in a fishbowl of transparency. If anyone believes my judgment has been compromised, the record will provide all the evidence needed for appeal." Marcus's gaze moved to Tyler Garrett, whose face had gone pale. "Justice cannot exist in shadows," Marcus continued. "It cannot thrive when those who enforce the law use it as a weapon rather than a shield. And it fails completely when judges lack the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, even about themselves." He nodded to the bailiff. "Call your first witness." The special master, a distinguished attorney with silver hair and a reputation for thoroughness, rose and called Sergeant Frank Kowalski to the stand. Frank walked to the witness box with the bearing of a man who'd already made peace with the consequences of his choices. His uniform was crisp, his shoulders back, but his eyes held the weariness of someone who'd carried too many secrets for too long. After the oath, the special master began his examination. "Sergeant Kowalski, how long have you served with the Millfield Creek Police Department?" 34 years this November. "And in that time, have you observed patterns of misconduct?" Frank's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir, especially in the last 8 years since Chief Briggs took command." "Please describe these patterns." Frank took a deep breath. The chief implemented what he called productivity metrics, basically arrest quotas. Officers who didn't meet their numbers got written up, passed over for promotions, assigned to the worst shifts. It created an environment where officers felt pressured to make arrests, even questionable ones, just to keep their jobs. Marcus listened, his expression neutral, but his mind cataloged every word. This wasn't just about Friday night. This was systemic. "Did you witness the arrest of Judge Brennan?" "No, sir. But I was on desk duty when officers Garrett and Morrison brought him in. I reviewed their report and immediately things didn't add up." To retirement, then I could speak up. He looked directly at Marcus. "But when I saw him sitting in that cell, this man who'd done nothing wrong, I realized I'd already waited too long. Sometimes courage isn't about having nothing to lose. It's about finally deciding that your conscience matters more than your comfort." A heavy silence filled the courtroom. The testimony continued through the morning. The special master called Rebecca Chen, who presented the documentation Frank had provided, years of arrest reports that showed clear patterns of racial profiling, targeting of low-income residents, and falsified probable cause statements. Then came the personnel files. The special master displayed Officer Tyler Garrett's record on the courtroom monitors. Clean, actually. Multiple commendations for de-escalation and community engagement from his first 3 years on the force. Then, 2 years ago, a dramatic shift. More arrests, more use of force incidents, more complaints. "Officer Garrett," the special master said, "you've been called to testify. Please take the stand." Tyler stood slowly. His hands trembled as he placed them on the Bible for the oath. When he sat in the witness box, he looked young and utterly lost. "Officer Garrett, can you explain the change in your performance record 2 years ago?" Tyler's voice was barely audible. "That's when my wife Sarah was diagnosed with MS. The medical bills, they were overwhelming. I applied for a transfer to the county sheriff's department. The pay was better, and they had superior health insurance. What happened with that transfer? Chief Briggs denied it. He said the department had invested in my training and couldn't afford to lose good officers. He told me if I worked harder, proved my value, he'd reconsider. Did he define what working harder meant? Tyler's face crumpled. He showed me my productivity numbers, said I needed to bring them up to department standards. By making more arrests? Yes, sir. The special master pulled up another document. I have a memo here from Chief Briggs to all patrol officers, dated 3 months ago. It specifically mentions you and Officer Morrison as examples of officers who understand what it takes to serve this community effectively. Did this pressure influence your actions on Friday night? Tyler's shoulders shook.
Proceeded differently. Tyler looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time. I want to say yes, but the truth is, that's the whole problem, isn't it? I should have treated him with respect and dignity, whether he was a judge or a homeless man or anyone else. The badge is supposed to mean I protect everyone equally. Instead, I've been using it as an excuse to meet quotas. The afternoon session brought more testimony. Officer Chris Morrison, his voice steadier than Tyler's but equally haunted, described similar pressures. He'd been in therapy since a shooting incident last year where he'd been forced to fire on an armed suspect. The department offered no counseling, no support, just pressure to get back on the street and maintain productivity. I couldn't sleep, Chris said. I kept seeing it over and over. I started seeing threats everywhere, and the chief's answer was to work harder, make more arrests, prove I wasn't weak. By the time the special master called for a recess, the portrait was complete and devastating. This wasn't a story of 2 rogue cops. It was a story of institutional failure, of leadership that weaponized fear, of good people ground down by a system designed to produce numbers instead of justice. Marcus retreated to his chambers. He sat in silence, the afternoon light fading through the windows. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His clerk opened the door. "Judge, there's someone here to see you. Rebecca Chen. She says it's personal." Marcus nodded. "Send her in." Rebecca entered, still wearing her professional suit, but her expression had shifted from courtroom advocate to something more vulnerable. "Your Honor, I need to tell you something. When I saw the name Jeremy Brennan in your disclosure forms, it struck me as familiar. I did some research last night." She paused, her voice catching. "I served in Afghanistan, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Your son was in our unit." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stood slowly. "You knew Jeremy?" "Yes, sir. Not well. I was Navy JAG attached to the unit, but I remember him. He had this way of making everyone laugh, even in the worst situations. After a particularly brutal firefight, he organized this ridiculous..." His eyes. Your son would have understood that. He'd have wanted to help them. After Rebecca left, Marcus stood alone in his chambers, looking out at the town of Millfield Creek below. Somewhere in this community, Tyler Garrett was going home. The silence in the courtroom was the kind that pressed against your chest. Every person in the gallery seemed to be holding their breath. Marcus stood behind the bench, his hands resting on the polished wood, his black robes falling in sharp lines. He had spent the weekend reviewing every piece of testimony, every document, every recorded conversation that Special Master William Chen had meticulously compiled. The truth was laid bare. Chief Walter Briggs had built an empire of fear. Officers were forced to meet quotas or lose their jobs. Training was minimal. Mental health support was non-existent. The culture rewarded aggression and punished compassion. And at the center of it all were 2 young men who had made terrible choices under unbearable pressure. Marcus cleared his throat. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. "This court has reviewed the comprehensive findings submitted by Special Master Chen," he began, his voice steady and clear. "The evidence reveals a pattern of systemic failures within the Millfield Creek Police Department that created an environment where civil rights violations were not only possible, but inevitable." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Chief Walter Briggs is hereby removed from his position, effective immediately. A criminal referral has been submitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office for charges, including obstruction of justice, conspiracy to interfere with federal proceedings, and deprivation of rights under color of law. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the back row, Briggs's face turned crimson, but the federal marshals flanking him ensured his silence. Marcus continued. The Millfield Creek Police Department will be placed under a federal consent decree for a minimum of 3 years. An independent monitor will oversee all operations. Training protocols will be completely redesigned, and a community oversight board will be established with real authority. He looked down at his notes, though he didn't need them. Every word had been carved into his heart. Now we come to the matter of Officers Tyler Garrett and Christopher Morrison. Both men sat.
Justify your actions. Tyler's head dropped. Beside him, Chris wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. Under normal circumstances, termination would be the appropriate consequence. Your actions would end your careers in law enforcement, and formal complaints would ensure you could never work in this field again. Sarah Garrett made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Marcus leaned forward. But these are not normal circumstances. Every head in the courtroom lifted. The evidence shows that you, Officer Garrett, were once a promising young officer who joined this department with genuine ideals. You wanted to help people. You wanted to make a difference. Marcus's voice softened. And then your wife became ill. The medical bills mounted. Chief Briggs denied your transfer requests. You were trapped in a system that exploited your desperation and twisted your better nature into something you never intended to become. Tyler's shoulders shook. He covered his face with his hands. Officer Morrison, the record shows you were involved in a shooting 2 years ago. A suspect pointed a weapon at your partner and you did your job. You saved a life. But instead of receiving proper counseling and support, you were given 3 days off and told to move on. Your PTSD was ignored. Your requests for help were dismissed. Chris nodded, tears streaming down his face. Marcus straightened. This court believes in accountability, but it also believes in redemption. He gestured to Rebecca Chen, who stood and distributed folders to everyone at the defense table. I am offering you both a choice, Marcus said. You can accept immediate termination with formal complaints filed against you, ending your law enforcement careers. Or you can voluntarily enter an intensive 6-month rehabilitation program. Tyler's head snapped up, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. The program will be administered by the Legacy Riders Motorcycle Club in partnership with community organizations throughout this region. You will work directly with veterans who have overcome trauma, with formerly incarcerated individuals who have rebuilt their lives, and with community members who have been harmed by discriminatory policing. Marcus could see confusion and hope warring on both officers' faces. You will maintain your current salaries during this period. Your families will be supported. Officer Garrett, partnership. Marcus paused, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. You will not be the same officers you were. You will be better. You will help ensure that what happened to you, and what you did to me, never happens to anyone else. The courtroom erupted. People were crying, hugging, shouting questions. The court reporter looked up from her machine, tears on her cheeks. Order, Marcus said firmly, and the room gradually quieted. Officers Garrett and Morrison, you have 24 hours to make your decision. This court is in recess. Before anyone could move, Tyler Garrett stood. His voice was hoarse and broken. Your Honor, I don't need 24 hours. He turned to look at his wife, who nodded through her tears. I accept your offer, and I swear I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving I deserve this second chance. Chris Morrison rose beside him. Me too, Your Honor. I accept. The courtroom exploded again, but this time Marcus let it go. He watched as Sarah's friends helped wheel her forward so Tyler could embrace her. He watched Rebecca Chen shake hands with both officers.
her smile genuine and warm. He watched Sergeant Kowalski, tears streaming down his weathered face, stand and salute from the back of the room. Marcus stepped down from the bench and removed his robe. Underneath, he wore a simple dress shirt. Pinned to the pocket was the small silver emblem of the Legacy Riders, a phoenix rising from flames. He walked to Tyler and Chris. Both men straightened, uncertain. "My son Jeremy was a Marine," Marcus said quietly. He believed that people were defined not by their worst moments but by what they did after those moments. He believed in brotherhood, in second chances, in the power of people to choose who they want to become. He extended his hand to Tyler, who took it with trembling fingers. "Don't let him down," Marcus said. "Don't let yourselves down. And don't let this community down." "We won't, sir," Tyler whispered. "I promise." Marcus shook Chris's hand next, then turned to Sarah. He crouched beside her wheelchair. "Your husband is going to be all right," he told her. "You both are." "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you for seeing him."
Treatment was working. Chris Morrison followed them out, laughing at something one of the kids had said. He was finishing his counseling sessions and had just been certified as a peer support specialist for other officers dealing with trauma. The statewide training program they'd developed was being implemented in 12 departments. Early results showed promise. Fewer complaints, better community relationships, officers who actually wanted to do the job right. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca Chen. "Proud of our guys. Jeremy would be too." He smiled and typed back. Yes, he would. The clerk knocked. "Your Honor, they're ready for you." Marcus stood and pulled on his robe. The small silver pin caught the morning light. He'd stopped hiding it weeks ago. The compartments of his life had finally dissolved. He was Marcus Brennan. He was Storm. He was a judge, a father, a grieving man who had learned that mercy and justice were not opposites, but partners. He was whole. The courtroom was already full when he entered. A young man stood at the defense table, early 20s, tattoos covering his arms, eyes filled with fear and defiance. The public defender looked exhausted. The prosecutor looked impatient. Marcus settled into his seat and reviewed the file. Drug possession, third offense. The young man had a record dating back to juvenile court. On paper, he looked like a lost cause. But Marcus had learned to look past paper. He set down the file and leaned forward. The young man flinched. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently. Anthony, sir. Anthony Martinez." "Tell me your story, Anthony. Not the version in this file. Your real story. What brought you here?" Anthony blinked, confused. No judge had ever asked him that before. My mom's sick, Your Honor. I was trying to make money for her treatment, and I made stupid choices. I know that sounds like an excuse." "It doesn't sound like an excuse," Marcus interrupted. "It sounds like desperation. It sounds like someone who was trying to help the person he loves and didn't know how to do it the right way." Anthony's tough exterior cracked. His eyes filled with tears. "Have you ever heard never finally be finished?"